Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Marketing Cloud Developer Bootcamp Day 1. This is a joint event in collaboration with Salesforce Marketer Group Phoenix and Salesforce Marketers Group Georgia. And joining with me today, Jordan. Jordan is going to dive into the technical topics of the certification, which will be the data modeling and security. And Naji will be joining today with us. And as always, we have Gilda with us. And a little bit about me, I am Jyotsna Bitra, go by the name JB. I am a marketing cloud consultant and a marketing champion, 16 times certified application architect. I'm the founder and co-leader of the Salesforce Marketers Group Phoenix and Golden Hoodie recipient. And here's the blog that I update all the marketing cloud resources here. This is the agenda for today's session. We're going to cover a little bit about the certification, the different certifications that are available in the marketing cloud space, and in particular about the marketing cloud developer certification and few resources that are available using which you would be able to prepare for the certification.
JB, sorry, really quick. I think that when you started recording, the screen share went away.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Okay. And thanks, Jordan. So you're able to see the screen share?
Yes.
Okay. So here's the agenda for today's session. We're going to cover a little bit about the certifications that are available and also in detail about the Marketing Cloud Developer certification and a couple of other useful resources that can be helpful in your certification journey. And how this bootcamp is scheduled, the topics, various topics and the speakers. And today Jordan is going to cover in depth about the exam topic, data modeling and security. And a few housekeeping items before we get started. So this session is going to be recorded and it will be uploaded to the YouTube channel. So if you have attended the other bootcamps, you would know the YouTube channel, it's Trailblazing Together. And this time we will be uploading the recordings all together in the first week of August. And good news, we do have Salesforce certification vouchers to give away to the attendees. A criteria for the eligibility is going to be that you must attend all the sessions in this bootcamp. And if you have any questions during the session, please type them in the chat window and we will address them at the end of the session. And we do have the Slack channel, and I'm sure all of you might already be a part of the Slack channel. This is the same channel that we have maintained for the other bootcamps as well, the admin and the consultant. So if you're already part of the channel, you don't need to do anything additional. So you're already part of it. So if you have any questions after the session, feel free to post it on the Slack channel. And also we will be sharing all the updates regarding the bootcamp in the Slack channel itself. And we also have a session dedicated to address your questions that you may have. That will be the last session of this bootcamp, the Ask Me Anything panel. I will cover about it in depth in the next slides. And here are our speakers for the Developer Bootcamp, and I take the privilege of introducing them. Vlad, Jordan, Elliot, and Matthew are going to cover the exam topics. And joining us for the Ask Me Anything panel, we have Greg and Jenna. And we do have Naji and Gilda helping out with the event organization. And I would like to take this opportunity and give a shout out to all the speakers of all the previous bootcamps that we have conducted, without whom this wouldn't be possible. And we, till date, we see many success stories and many people thanking us for the bootcamps. So that goes to each and every speakers who have put in a lot of efforts in bringing the best content for this bootcamp series. And I would like to give a huge shout out to three speakers, especially, that is Vlad, Elliot, and Gilda. They have been part of each and every bootcamp, and they have spent numerous hours in planning for the sessions and in various internal meetings, deciding the schedule and the exam topics that we should cover. And they provided a lot of insights, and Gilda especially, she was there for each and every session, and she was making sure that all the sessions go perfectly well, and she has been very helpful. And I would like to take this opportunity and thank Gilda, Vlad, and Elliot, and all other speakers. And so that brings to our session topic today. So you may be doing perfectly well on your job, and you may be excelling in your career, and still you may be thinking, why all this stress on the certifications? So certifications are still important to prove your expertise, and they may be helpful in growing further in your career. You don't know what opportunity awaits you next. So certifications are like a self-testament that you are qualified to do something and you're an expert in certain field. So it also helps you to uncover the topics which you may not know while you prepare for the certifications. There may be some topics that you haven't had hands-on on. That certification preparation will help you to get exposed to the new topics, new features, and get acquainted with all the capabilities of the Marketing Cloud. And it also shows your commitment towards your personal growth and also your commitment towards your company's success. And it may open new opportunities for you as well. And here are some of the certification tips. So as you have come to the developer certification level, I already I'm sure that you might have taken few other certifications before, prerequisites like the email certifications or the admin or other certifications as well. You may be well aware with the certification process. How do you log into the web assessor? How do you schedule it? And you may be also be acquainted with the preparation process. Here are some of the tips that just to refresh your brain. First of all, start with the exam guide. Understand what all topics are covered in the exam guide, and where you stand with respect to the understanding of those topics. And the next one is this thing which I would follow is first go ahead and book your certification. That helps you keep motivated and stay focused. And also, I am a strong believer that what gets scheduled gets done. So if you don't schedule it, we keep on postponing. That's exactly true in my case. So I would first go ahead and book the certification and see how much time I would need, and accordingly book the date. And I would plan each day how much of time I can spend, and what are the topics that needs more revision. And also getting a hands-on experience would be very much important and helpful. And if there are any study groups, join them, and that may be helpful in discussing with the fellow participants. And if there is no study group that exists, feel free to create one and invite the other people who are planning to take the certification. And there are some practice exams that are available on the web assessor, which you can take and see where you stand, and if you need further preparation or you're ready to take the exam. And during the exam, this is one important thing which I would follow. If I'm not sure of what the answer is, I would generally mark the question, and later at the end of the exam, I would go with a fresh brain again and look at the question once more, and I would at that time I would be able to better think about the question one more time and answer that. And also remember that failure is just part of this certification journey. And I till now I didn't see any person who haven't failed, who have cleared all the certifications on the first attempt. So remember that it's okay to fail, and failing is nothing but learning more. And one of the important thing, we don't want to encourage any certification dumps. And also these boot camps are focused or intended to help you further gain more expertise in the Marketing Cloud topics, and not to help you. It's not a shortcut to clear your certifications. So the intention to include the Ask Me Anything panel or addressing your questions on the Slack channel is to help you gain expertise, and not to just understand some topics and go sit for the certification exam. And here is a list of all the Marketing Cloud certifications that are available currently. As you see here, Marketing Cloud Administrator is a prerequisite for the Marketing Cloud Consultant, and Marketing Cloud Email Specialist is a prerequisite for the Marketing Cloud Developer. And in the developer certification, it is intended for the people who has experience configuring and customizing the data, and also subscriber management across different channels, and using various programmatic languages like SSJS, APIs, and SQL. Would be able to troubleshoot and create some automations. And also it tests for some experience in as a full stack developer, creating personalized dynamic messages, landing pages, and also usage of the scripting languages, and experience with the data configuration, manipulations, and segmentations, as well as reporting and analytics. And here's the exam outline. The data modeling, it takes up to 14% of the exam. And programmatic languages, it takes a huge chunk of the exam, which includes all the languages that are used, the SSJS, AMPscript, and other scripting languages like AMPscript, SQL, and other things. And the APIs, which include the REST and the SOAP APIs, which takes up to 22% of the exam. And data management, it takes up to 22%. And security, it takes 7% of the exam. And in today's session, Jordan is going to cover both the data modeling and the security topics. And here here's how the exam format is going to look like. You can expect 60 questions, and maybe 5 more additional questions that may be focused on the new release. And all the questions are going to be either multiple choice or the multiple select. And you would have 105 minutes to complete the exam, and 63% is the passing score. And you would be able to know whether you could clear the exam or not as soon as you submit the exam. And you would be able to schedule the exam on site or online, but I think most of the sites are only open for online registrations as of now. And the prerequisite for the developer exam is that you should have at least 1 year of development experience using various tools. And also email specialist certification is a prerequisite for this one. And here are some of the useful resources. And I love this post created by Gilda. This is like a master list of all the resources that are available that are related to all the Marketing Cloud certifications. So we will be sharing this document post the session. You can access these links, and you also can find a trail on the trailhead that is related to the developer certification. And also here you see the exam guide and various resources that you can find more information regarding the Marketing Cloud developer role. And one of the blog which I really liked is by Jordan. He has a wonderful blog. I really loved this. And he also created a study guide in the Google Sheets. It is like exhaustive, and it covers all the aspects of the exam. Please be sure to check this out and start preparing using this sheet. And we also have a few other blogs created by Susanna, myself, and Jackson. So you would be able to access all these resources post the session. And here's our bootcamp schedule. In today's session, we're going to cover the data modeling and the security topics of the exam. And on 15th, Elliot is going to cover the programmatic languages. And on 20th, Vlad is going to cover about the API. And on 22nd, Matthew will be covering the data management topic. And on 27th, we do have the Ask Me Anything panel, which is joined by Vlad, Elliot, Greg, and Jenna. And all the sessions are at 9 p.m. Eastern every Tuesday and Thursday. And if you are attending from the other side of the globe, it will be the next day for you, 7:14 or 7:16 accordingly. I'm going to quickly mute the participants, and we will be able to. Okay, thank you. So And as we are designing this bootcamp, we noticed that it needs a detailed understanding of all the individual programmatic languages like SSJS, AMP-script, APIs, SQL, and so on. So if we were to include everything in this bootcamp, it's going to be a 15-day or a 20-day bootcamp. So what we decided is this bootcamp is going to be a high-level overview and help you prepare for the certification. And if you want to know in depth about these SSJS, SQL, and further, we are planning for some sessions later after the bootcamp. They will be very detailed, and even if you're not preparing for the certification, they will help you get up to the speed as a marketing cloud developer. So we will be sharing those updates later. And this is today's topic. I will let Jordan talk about it, and he will be able to cover in depth very well about this. So I will turn it over to Jordan. I'm going to stop my screen share. Jordan, feel free to share yours.
Awesome. Let me share mine. Let me know when it comes across. Is that coming across correctly?
Yes, all good. Please go ahead.
Awesome. Well, thanks, JB. Thanks, team. Really excited to be here. This is it's interesting actually being on this side of the equation for some of these sessions. I know that over the last couple of years, I've been an audience member quite a bit for my journey with Marketing Cloud. But just as additional background for me, I'm Jordan Seeley. I'm a solution architect at Slalom, based out of the lovely Denver, Colorado. If you were on earlier, I was catching up with some of the panelists just talking about everything happening here in the city, but love Denver, love being outside. It's a huge part of my identity, alongside being 12 times Salesforce certified. I originally got my start in the Salesforce ecosystem with the sales and service side, so core CRM. And about 4 years ago, I started working almost exclusively with Marketing Cloud, and it's really been the place where I've gravitated to the most with my career, and where I see my career growing in the future as well. So really focused on building solutions that strike a balance between technology, health, and sustainability. I did my undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering and have been really involved in working with organizations in the healthcare industry. So that's been a primary focus for myself. And outside of work, I love to get out and about, usually do hikes on the weekends, I'm a big coffee drinker, and when those combine, then you get the best of both worlds. So that's a little bit about me. I originally sat and took my Salesforce Marketing Cloud Developer Certification exam almost 2 years ago. So it's been even 2 years since that exam came out, and happy to talk through my experience with Marketing Cloud and the certification itself. So without further ado, let's hop directly into it. JB and team covered a little bit about the logistics about the bootcamp, the Marketing Cloud certifications overview, and then in particular, the developer exam outline. I'll spend just a second here giving a little bit of additional context to the topics that we'll be discussing today, which are data modeling and security. And we're really using these bullet points within each of these topics as our North Star for the session. So for data modeling, we're going to focus on what it takes to configure the account contact model in Marketing Cloud. And then given different scenarios, differentiate the different types or settings and uses of data extensions within Marketing Cloud. We'll talk about how contact records relate across different channels. We'll talk about different keys and IDs that are used to do so. And then we'll really talk about the detailed process for contact deletions before we wrap up and then go to security as a whole. So only 7% is assigned for weighting to security, but I do think that there are some tricky concepts in here. So we'll actually plan to spend about 30 minutes on both data modeling and then 30 minutes on security. And then whatever time we have left, when we get to that point, we'll open for kind of broader questions and answers. But within security, we'll talk about some of the basics for different options on securing data in Marketing Cloud, and then some of those best practices that we really recommend or see across implementations that different organizations use. So with that being said, we're going to hop right into data modeling. And we'll start with a concept that I don't see coming up as much these days as maybe 2 to 3 years ago, But we used to have conversations a lot around which data model should we use within Marketing Cloud. And there used to be this split or differentiation between using data extensions versus using lists. And I'll cover this relatively quickly because I think that nowadays, pretty much everyone is using data extensions. There are some specific use cases where lists are more appropriate. And you can see some of those reasons on the slide. This will be available after the session, so you can dig into that in more detail if you would like. But in large part, data extensions are going to provide faster import speeds, the ability to use triggered sends, the ability to actually hit Marketing Cloud APIs, both SOAP and REST, as well as just provide additional flexibility for your subscription model and the ability to implement a custom preference center, which are not applicable to the list object model. So with that said, I'll leave it at that high level. If there are additional questions or comments on that, happy to answer those at the end of the session. But that really kind of just sets the foundation for our first topic as a whole, which if out of the two primary object models, data extensions and lists, we primarily use data extensions. Let's talk exactly what we mean when we talk about data extensions. So for data extensions, we have a couple of different types that are primarily used. And the way that I think of data extensions, just within the context of Marketing Cloud as a whole, is data extension is the same thing as a table. If you're familiar with the core CRM side of the equation, that's the same thing as like an object. And all of these things are really the building blocks of how we build a data model within Marketing Cloud, using Contact Builder or Data Designer as tools to do so. So some of these types of data extensions that we use as these building blocks or Legos are first and foremost the standard good old data extension, which is the default type that's used in Marketing Cloud. This is from which we build filtered or random data extensions, and really just the bread and butter of what you're probably going to use most of the time within Marketing Cloud. Aside from standard data extensions, you might have a Salesforce data extension, which is a data extension that originates from core CRM. And usually that's sent from core CRM to Marketing Cloud via a report or a campaign. That requires using Marketing Cloud Connect or that integration from core CRM to Marketing Cloud. But there is a nuance between Salesforce data extension versus standard data extension. And if that wasn't confusing, we'll add in another little wrinkle here when we talk about synchronized data extensions, which are, and this is the key word, non-sendable data extensions that are populated by that Marketing Cloud Connect integration user. So I won't go into too many details about the differences here, but know that there are differences between Salesforce data extensions that come from reports and campaigns, and then synchronized data extensions, with the key one of those being that synchronized data extensions are non-sendable. I think that is an important concept that'll, if not come up on the exam, in practice, it'll come up more often than not. So tuck that away. Then we talk about different settings or how we can use data extensions. So shared data extensions and shared Salesforce data extensions. These are typically data extensions that are shared from one business unit to another, typically from parent business unit to a child business unit. But essentially just know that this is when we're sharing a specific data extension across business units so that other users can access them. And then the last two overall settings that we have are sendable data extensions and testable data extensions. And we use these to denote which data extensions we can actually use for sending or for testing. A standard data extension might not be needed to be used for sending, or it might not even be possible to send with. And an example of that might be a data extension that doesn't contain an attribute that has an email address. It'll be pretty hard to send to that data extension if you don't have an email address as a part of the attributes that are stored. And then just rounding out what testable is, you have to have a data extension designated as sendable before it can be testable. And this is essentially just another setting that allows you to designate within the context of a test send. These are data extensions that can be selected. So that's just something to be aware of. All right. When we talk about data extensions as the building blocks for a data model, the building blocks for data extensions are attributes. And I won't go into too much detail about these, but know that there are different types of attributes that you can use when you're setting up data extensions. The most common will be text, number, date, Boolean, and email. Decimal, phone, and locale are certainly used, but I would say to a lesser extent. There are certain considerations with each of these, but not necessarily worth us going into too much detail right now. The biggest thing to mention is that for data extensions, you'll want to make sure that your source data is being input into the correct attribute type when it's loaded into a data extension. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on our next slide, which is just going to round out from a data extension perspective. What are some of the best practices or leading practices that we see when we implement Marketing Cloud? So for sendable data extensions, you really only want to have one email address or try to have one email address on those data extensions where possible. And this is going to improve performance as well as limit the amount of additional contacts that might get added to Marketing Cloud. And I mention that because if you're familiar with Journey Builder, in Journey Builder settings, if you're using a data extension that's sendable, you have to define which email is going to be used in that journey. And if you have multiple email addresses, sometimes that can make the relationship between the email address that's being used for that journey and the contact key, which we'll talk about more in a second here, it can be duplicative. So as a general rule, think for sendable data extensions, one email address, or to a broader extent, one overall subscriber key for the channel that you're sending on. I spoke about this a little bit on the previous slide, but matching data types of your source data with the appropriate data type for the attributes. And I run into this quite a bit because organizations that have an integration with Core CRM, there's actually more data types in Core CRM for fields or attributes than there are in Marketing Cloud. And so sometimes you might have, let's say, a currency data type that we have to map to a decimal field data type when it gets into Marketing Cloud. But it's really, really important. I can't stress how important it is to at least perform some type of mapping exercise, because this may impact what features or functionalities you can use when you're using that data extension. And a perfect example of this that I ran into about a year ago was went into a Marketing Cloud environment and saw that we had a date attribute or date attribute that was supposed to be a date attribute that was being stored as text. And we weren't actually able to use that date attribute when we were querying or filtering for an audience that we wanted to segment on based on that date because it was stored as text. So there are a couple of key things that have downstream impacts if you're not performing that exercise proactively. Total field length should not exceed 4,000 characters for text-based attributes. This is actually a hard technical limit, and it'll even if you get close to 4,000, you'll have some performance implications. So just keep that in mind when you have text-based fields. Try to limit it as much as possible to bring in the right amount of data that you need to use to support your marketing objectives. And we'll talk a little bit about the principle of least privilege when we get into the security portion of the evening. But know that this is a hard technical limit when we talk about text-based data attributes. And then last, which is also similar to the concept of security, you'll notice that throughout, not only today, but throughout the entirety of the bootcamp, there's a lot of intermingling of all of these concepts, which makes it really important for you to understand kind of a foundational level of each of them, because they do play into each other quite a bit. But to round out our data extensions best practices, retention settings or policies can be used to delete records from data extensions, which will improve performance, and it also limits the risk of storing sensitive data. So if you have specific information that's coming into a data extension that you don't need to be stored forever, I would recommend using retention settings. It'll pay dividends on a number of different areas. And then I won't go into too much detail here, but that might have an asterisk on it, because if you're doing something like an overwrite operation when you're bringing data into a data extension, you might not need to worry about retention settings. So all things to consider when we're talking about setting up data extensions and starting to use them in meaningful ways for an overall data model for the contact model, which brings us to our contact model. I'll go over this concept between keys and IDs. This usually doesn't come up too much in practice in terms of like when you're actually implementing, but it is an important concept to understand the difference. especially for understanding the kind of developer topics as a whole, as it relates to the certification. So generally speaking, whenever we talk about an ID, that's going to be something that's system generated or defined by the system. So that's true for contact ID, that's true for subscriber ID. These are basically system generated primary keys, not to confuse it further with a generic primary key, but these are system generated primary keys that are really used on the back end to keep track of overall contacts and the overall subscribers and channels that they belong to. And if we have system defined IDs, we also have a corresponding user defined. So in our user interface within Marketing Cloud, we have the ability to define contact keys or the unique identifier for a specific contact, excuse me. And then we also have a subscriber key. And so we can see where these are used within Marketing Cloud, contact key and contact ID, both being used in Contact Builder as a whole. These are our unique identifiers for contacts. We use subscriber ID and subscriber key in Email Studio or for email as a channel, which actually does relate to our contacts. So we have a contact key and a subscriber key associated with them for their subscription to our email channel within Marketing Cloud. To a lesser extent, we also have primary key and foreign keys, which are user defined as well. And our primary key is really applied across all data extensions. That's our unique identifier for any row in that data extension. And then a foreign key can also be on a data extension, which is typically when we're creating a relationship between one data extension and another. More often than not, that foreign key is coming from a foreign system. So it might be a unique identifier for, let's say, a sales order, which is going to relate that to the individual that's placing that sales order. That allows us to actually create relationships between the data that we're bringing into Marketing Cloud in meaningful ways. I think I'll leave it at that. There's probably some questions on this. This is a topic that I normally get additional questions on when we have this conversation elsewhere. But I'll leave it there for now. And if there are additional questions, more than happy to answer those if and when they come up. All right, we're doing well. Within the contact model, this is a screen that many of you have likely seen. If you haven't seen it before, this is where we really actually configure the contact model within Contact Builder, and in particular, this Data Designer tab. So we have at the center of our Marketing Cloud and the center of every universe for organizations that interact with customers is our customers, and in this context is our contacts, right? Coming out the hub and spoke model for each of these bubbles that we see are our attribute groups. And some of these are system defined, so they come preloaded with Marketing Cloud, especially depending on what other modules you have purchased or you've already implemented. But we also have the ability to create attribute groups as well. And really what this does is this allows us to basically assign those relationships between the data extensions that we were just talking about, so that we can use that data when we're querying, when we're filtering, when we're in journeys. All of those data relationships should persist and allow us to have a full picture of the contacts that we're modeling within Marketing Cloud. One thing that I'll point out here, I don't see too much use of this practically. Maybe some people do, but there is a concept of populations within Marketing Cloud, which is basically saying we're going to create another version of how we're modeling contacts. Most organizations just need one. So they'll actually do their contact model data designer building directly here. They might not need multiple populations, but if you do, you can create multiple. There is a recommendation from Salesforce to limit the number of populations that you build to, it used to be 3. Now I hear it's either 2 or 3, depending on kind of how customized or how complex your logic is for modeling those populations. But know that this is a tool in the tool belt, so to speak, when it comes to building contact models in Contact Builder. With that said, so if I was going to actually click into this, into one of these attribute groups, I think the one that I have is mobile push. If I was going to click into one of these attribute groups, what we're going to see next is a breakout of the different data extensions that are within that attribute group. So we can see that we have this contact, and here we see this reference to, on the previous 2 slides ago, I had contact key and contact ID. We're referencing this unique contact ID, and this is being associated with our first data extension, which is mobile push demographics. And then we have 2 other data extensions, mobile push tags and mobile push subscriptions here, which are linked. And you can see the linkage of the relationships by highlighting on these nodes when you're in Contact Builder, and this will give you an understanding of how these specific tables are related. So just to speak to this in a little bit more detail, on the left-hand side here, we have our mobile push demographics, we have our mobile push, and really it should have a breakout between mobile push tags and subscriptions. But we can see that application is related to application. It's a primary key on our mobile push demographics, or it's a key on our mobile push demographics data extension. And then we have device ID mapping to device ID over here as well. So these map because they're exactly the same name. In some cases, that might not be true. So for example, in core CRM, you have the contact object and the case object. And on the case object, you might have a lookup that says contact ID instead of contact. So these might not always match, but this is where you would define which attribute should be used to match to the other attribute from a value perspective. The last concept that I'll just point out here is one of cardinality, and that's a keyword that will likely, if I was going to bet, I would say that will come up on the certification exam itself. Cardinality as a whole is important, and that's when we talk about, is the relationship that we're defining one-to-one or is it one-to-many? So in this context, we have a one-to-infinity or one-to-many relationship for our cardinality. There might be certain scenarios or certain data models that you implement where one-to-one is more fitting. So remember that as a concept. That'll certainly be something to study up on in preparation for the exam as a whole. Other notes, attribute groups like this one, some of them will come already configured based off of the standard relationships. So when I set this up, or when I came into Contact Builder, this was already set up. This wasn't something that I did. Custom data extensions and relationships can be created. So if those standard relationships do not fit your business need or really accomplish your business goals, those can be customized where needed. Cardinality must be defined when data extensions are linked. So if you're going to set up a relationship, you have to say it's either one-to-many or one-to-one. And then one just practical call out for linking data extensions in Contact Builder, which is the right approach, is that you may find in other modules, namely Email Studio, you won't be able to perform all of the activities if that data extension is linked in Contact Builder. So the example that I always run into is if I'm in Email Studio and I want to add an attribute to a data extension, maybe I say, hey, I really need a date attribute that automatically populates with the system date whenever a record is added to the data extension. I can't do that from Email Studio if the data extension is referenced in Contact Builder. You'd actually have to come into Contact Builder and do that. So a little bit of a nuance, probably too detailed for the purposes of this, but I like to layer in some of anecdotal experience from implementation too, because I know that a lot of people will run into some of these things when hands meet the keyboard outside of the exam as well. So with that, we're going to hop into contact deletion. We got about 45 minutes left total, so I think we're okay on pace, and I'll continue to ask. I know JB and Gilda will keep me honest on timing, but if we do feel like we're lagging behind, or if we want to speed up or spend more time elsewhere, then feel free to let me know in the chat and we can plan accordingly. But with that said, this is actually interesting because I remember when I took the exam a couple of years ago, the contact delete process was first and foremost, there was less to it back in the day, but it's a really important concept. And I think that it gets a lot of love on the exam because of the importance of the topic, specifically as it relates to growing concerns for GDPR, CCPA, CASL, all of the different legislation that comes out that's related to contact privacy and really managing preferences. It's an increasingly important topic as a whole. So definitely one to pay some key attention to. And it's not a difficult process. We'll talk through basically everything you need to know about it. but I would imagine that you'll probably see a couple, if not 3, maybe more questions on this when it comes time to the exam, if I was going to guess. First and foremost, for the contact delete process, you have to have it enabled. So you'll see in Contact Builder, there's a tab called Contacts Configuration, which you have to make sure that it's selected to on before you're able to do a contact delete request. I will mention that this needs to be done in the parent business unit, just to make sure that this is enabled, and contact delete requests should originate from the parent business unit as well. So just a kind of logistic call out there. The manage settings link that you'll see here will open up a pop-up or a modal where it allows you to set what we will refer to, as a suppression period. And the default suppression period for the contact delete process is 14 days. I'll talk a little bit more about what this means for the overall contact delete process end to end, but know that the default is 14 days. That can range between 0 days. So you can move it from 14 down to 0, or you can move it as high as 30 days. So that's just something to understand, that you have the flexibility to change that suppression period associated with the contact delete process. All right, well, what is the contact delete process? There's a couple of different ways to do it. Personally, I've only ever done it through the user interface. You can do it via API as well. So if you need to make a call out to the REST API for deleting contacts, that is a viable mechanism. But the way that I've always done it in practice is usually by deleting by data extensions. You also have the ability to delete via lists or from selected contacts. So within Contact Builder, you could go in and you could say, I want to delete this data extension, process this as a delete. And that is your request. Whether you're doing that via API or via user interface, you're going to submit that request. And then what will happen is any of the contacts that are referenced as a part of that request, they will be entered into the suppression period. So on the previous screen where we said between 0 days and 30 days, they're basically going to be in a status or a state where they're getting primed or prepped for deletion. And as a part of that suppression period, you actually can't import any additional contacts or data that's associated with a contact that has the same contact key as the contact that you're deleting. That's pretty granular. I don't know if there would be any specific questions on that, but it's a topic that I think is important to know, because that may come up when you're actually deleting contacts. If they're in a suppression period and you have a business stakeholder that's saying, we're sending over data, it's not getting inserted in the marketing cloud, that's the reason, is because they might be subject to a suppression period in which any new imported data for those contacts is not going to come in. So however long that suppression period is, whether it's 0 days or 30 days, once this is up, the contact delete will occur. And then at that point, the contacts are deleted. They delete contacts across sendable data extensions. So any sendable data extension that you have in your marketing cloud account will essentially be combed for the contact keys that were submitted as a part of the contact deletion request. And if they appear in those sendable data extensions, they'll be removed. Places they won't be removed from are non-sendable data extensions. So that's something to keep in mind, especially if your organization's compliance, legal, trust, et cetera, those different types of entities come back and they want every single piece of data, which I think would probably be leading practice, especially if you have a contact delete request. You may need to institute some additional processes that comb through non-sendable data extensions to remove any contact data associated with those individuals. So just something to call out. The other place where it won't be deleted from is aggregated tracking information. So something like a send log, which is tracking for compliance purposes, when an email was sent and to who, the email subject line, et cetera. It won't be removed from something like a send log. So keep that in mind as well. All right. Best practices, leading practices, whatever we'd like to call them. You can delete up to 1 million contacts per contact delete request. You probably wouldn't do this if you were selecting individual contacts from Contact Builder, but you could do this if you had 1 million contacts in a list or in a data extension via the UI. I believe you could also do it through API as well, but I don't want to lie to you, so I'll check on that after the session. But you can do up to 1 million contacts per contact delete request. So if you have more than 1 million contacts, you'll have to have a conversation around how do we split this up, in meaningful ways, and then process those delete requests separately. I mentioned this before. The default suppression period is 14 days, modified as low as 0, as high as 30. I won't belabor the point there. It will delete subscribers from sendable data extensions and populations. It cannot be reversed. So that is an important call out here too. If for whatever reason, your compliance, legal, trust team comes back and says, hey, we might need a copy of this data somewhere else. I don't know if and when they would make that decision, but know that when a contact delete request is actually processed at the end of that suppression period, you can't go back to Salesforce and say, hey, can we get those back? So just be sure about the contact deletes that you're processing, because you can't reverse it afterwards. Data is not deleted from non-sendable data extensions and send logs. Other platform processes are prioritized above contact deletions. This is just something that I've heard and picked up from some of the help articles and notes over the years. I imagine that from a performance standpoint, the contact deletion process is pretty heavy. So there's probably, if I was going to guess, there's probably some load balancing that's happening on the back end based off of when Marketing Cloud servers have a high amount of other activity happening. So SQL queries, automation activities, journey builder processing events, et cetera. Those platform processes are prioritized above contact deletions. Just something to note. Number 7 is related to number 4. If you were concerned for whatever reason on the fact that it can't be reversed and you needed to export it, that might be a consideration worth making. And then I already mentioned that if you're initiating this request via the UI, you're going to want to do that in the parent business unit, which is where you enable contact delete to be performed at all. All right. Wow, we're speeding right along. I feel like I'm talking quite a bit. So I'm going to take a drink of water here really quick as we hop into our knowledge check. These are some of the topics that I think are important as it relates to data modeling as a whole. We flew through that, but that I think is a good overview of the 14% of the overall certification exam. So I'm going to take a drink of water here as I go to the next slide.
Well, while you take your break, we just want to tell you that you're doing a great job. Awesome job in talking, and keep going.
Awesome.
That's so quiet.
Do we have any questions that are worth addressing now? Since
I'm actually monitoring the chat right now, and everyone is just following along with everything you got going on.
Awesome. Cool. Well, okay, I thought we went back to the beginning for a second. I was really scared. we can start over. Of course not. So knowledge check around data modeling. I will ask some of these questions to myself and then I'll answer them myself. But if you're following along at home, feel free to either pause and maybe test yourself on some of the concepts that are coming up here. I think I've already spoken to some of these, but just to really drive home the important ones. What are some of the ways an administrator can speed up the contact delete process? So the easiest way is certainly to reduce the suppression period from the default of 14 days to 0 days. If you needed to get something done, by tomorrow to maybe remove the number of contacts that you have, or someone is particularly adamant on being removed from Marketing Cloud, you can speed that up by changing the suppression period. And then to a lesser degree, there's no data, I don't think, on this, but to improve the performance and improve how fast that process will happen. If you have any sendable data extensions that you're no longer using, or if you have some old ones from, let's say, like 2015, 2016, et cetera, that you're not going to use in the future, you can delete those. And then as a part of the contact delete process, it won't have to search through those sendable data extensions. So you'll get a little bit of additional processing power if you were going to delete data extensions that are sendable that are no longer being used. Cardinality in the contact model is the concept of understanding how one data extension relates to another. So one-to-one or one-to-many. Perfect example of one-to-many would be a contact to maybe cases. So me as Jordan Seeley, if I submit a case to Salesforce through the help and training portal, and then I submit another one, both of those are associated with me. So the cardinality between a contact and a case would be one-to-many. but know that when you create a relationship or link data extensions in the contact model, you'll have to define cardinality as part of that process. Is there a limit to the number of populations that can be created in Contact Builder? I think best guidance is 2 or 3. Most recent is you don't want to go past that in terms of performance on the platform. So just keep that in the back of your mind. We're to talk about, we're hitting this one over the head, 14 days. If there's one thing that you get out of this session, it might be 14 days is the default contact deletion suppression period. Might come up, might not. It's just one that's come up as a part of this session. Types of data extension not evaluated in the contact delete process. Again, those are the non-sendable data extensions, any data views or data extensions that store aggregatable, that's a word now, for any tracking data. Those are the different types of data extensions that are not evaluated. Differences between contact key and subscriber key. Contact key is our overall key that's used for an individual. So if I am Jordan Seeley and my contact key is 123, that is what is saying this is Jordan. Subscriber key is another key that I would have that relates to me, and that's going to be channel specific. When we talk about subscriber key itself, that generally refers to the email channel, but there are also subscriber keys for other channels. So for mobile push, I believe that's device ID. So if you have a mobile device and an application that's on that mobile device that you're pushing a push notification to, the key that we associate with that channel is the device ID that's being pushed to. Same thing for mobile connect or SMS. We have the equivalent of a subscriber key, and that's your phone number, right? So the subscriber keys or the concept of a subscriber key is largely channel based, whereas contact key is contact or individual based. Business units for which contact delete requests should be processed. Parent business unit, remember that. And then if I needed to delete 4.5 million contacts, how many contact deletion requests would I need to submit? If you're following along at home, you know the answer is 5, because we can do 1 million each. So we do 4 contact delete requests of 1 million each, and then we do one last one with 500,000 contacts. Awesome. All right, that takes us through data modeling as a topic.
Do you mind if we ask some questions while we have a moment?
Let's do it.
All right, so here we go. The first question is actually a request. Can we please have an example of population use? Have an example of a population use case, please?
Let me see.
If you are unable to answer at this time, that's perfectly fine. We also have our final last day Q&A session where you can ask any questions you want, everyone, as well as if you want to put this use case and you happen to have one in the Slack channel, you can also add that as well if you feel like you may not have enough time.
Yeah, I was trying to find it myself in the chat. Do you mind? I don't think I found it, but do you mind just repeating it, and I'll actually listen instead of trying to multitask? It was an example of what type of use case?
Population use.
Population use. Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah. So an example of when you might actually create a different type of population, and sometimes organizations will not unknowingly create populations, but they'll create something that a population is effectively serving like the functionality for. And the example that I typically see is if you have one marketing cloud account that is sending to both an internal audience and an external audience, that's a perfect example of populations. So I might have a population that I bring in and I call employees. If I'm sending, specific employee related updates across, let's say, an organization of 10, 20,000 people, employees is a population. And then a secondary population might be the customers themselves. So any external facing type of communications, that would be an example of different types of populations. The other one that comes readily to mind is some organizations may choose to treat geographic populations differently, especially when it comes to some of those privacy laws. So you might say, European contacts is a population as opposed to United States contacts as a population. So those are a couple of different scenarios in which populations might be used, but you don't have to use them overall if you wanted to. You could create data extensions without actually defining them as a population too. Is that helpful?
Yes, great answer. Thank you so much. Are you able to hear me, or do I sound muffled?
A little bit muffled on my end, but I think I got you enough. So.
Okay, sorry. I'm trying to see if I can fix the muffling. I'm going to move on to the next question as I try to fix this. So the next question that I have for you is, when a text attribute is defined in a data extension without a link, does it get limited to 4,000 characters?
That is a great question. I don't know the answer offhand, but if I was going to bet on it, I would say yes, it does get limited to 4,000 offhand. That's probably something we want to follow up on. Usually when you define an attribute, you also define the character length. There's some data attributes or data types for attributes that's not true, such as date. You don't have to define like how long that would be. But for example, when you create a data attribute of type text, the default length is 50, and you would go in and you'd modify that length. So if you wanted to create it without a limit, I don't actually know if I've ever tried to delete 50 and then save it to see if it would get around. But that might be something we can follow up on. I think that it would hard limit in the system to be 4,000 though, if I was going to guess. Good question.
Wonderful. How do I sound now? Do I sound better?
Much better, yes.
All right, wonderful. All right, so let's go on to our next question, Stella. So our next question is, so we have a composite key map to contact key in data model.
A composite key mapped. Let me see. I don't know if I know the answer to that.
Hey, that's a good answer. If we don't know the answers, we will be able to respond to this with an answer in our Slack chat.
You can follow up with that.
Thank you. We will follow up with this answer. So let's ask another question. The next question that we have is, let me see. Okay, I see that we're answering some of these questions. If I delete the contact with a suppression of 2 days, but now I want the contact back, and I make a suppression period of 0, then will I be able to import the contact back immediately? I feel like this is a little bit of a confusing question. I feel like it was confusing wording, but maybe, do you understand what I'm asking?
I think I've got it. So if you originally initiated a contact delete request and the suppression period was 2 days, I think there was actually another question that I was scanning through where once you delete or process a delete request, I was checking this on my other screen, but if you at any point go through, let's say that suppression period is 2 days and you say, oh no, I am changing my mind, you should be able to do that in the contacts analytics tab. So that's just one thing to note. But for this question in particular, if you were going to re-import in, you would want to do that after the contact has been deleted and after the contact suppression period is over. But if you kind of got cold feet for whatever reason, that's not the right analogy, but if you change your mind on the contact delete process, you should be able to do that within the contact analytics tab, which gives you an overview of what stage of the process that contact delete request is in. I think I skipped over that entirely, so it's fantastic that a question came up on that, because that's certainly an important thought to keep in mind. Cool.
Great answer. All right. One last question for right now. The question is, can we have tracking data for an anniversary sent a year ago, considering that Marketing Cloud restrains tracking data for 6 months?
That's a great question. And so the tracking data that you're referring to is really related to data views. So within Marketing Cloud, there's a 6-month limit on data view retention. I've done this in the past. I don't know if you necessarily want to do this depending on your overall volume, but it makes sense in some cases too. You could potentially create exports of those data views, or you could create copies of data extensions and populate those data extensions with the opens, clicks, sent information, etc., if you wanted to, which will get you past that 6-month window that the data view time period is limited for. That said, that's really related to tracking information as a whole. So if you're using the tracking information to identify your segmentation criteria, for example, I sent Jordan an email a year ago, and I want to use the fact that he opened that email a year ago to influence my segmentation criteria. You're going to need to have a copy of that, in which case you can go the route that I was just mentioning of creating a copy of the data extensions or exporting it so that you have that information elsewhere. But if you have a specific attribute, such as Jordan's birthday, that's stored not in the data views themselves, you should be able to use that in perpetuity, as long as your retention settings on the data extension doesn't chunk that row and throw out Jordan Seeley. But if that date is referenceable, not in the data views themselves, that should persist.
Great answer. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. We're going to let him continue to speak.
Awesome. Great questions. If more come up, feel free to reach out and we'll get them answered. And the ones that I wasn't able to answer, we'll get those answered too. So, with that said, we're going to hop into security. So I mentioned at the beginning, it's only 7% of the overall exam. I think that marketing cloud security is a huge topic as a whole, and it's an often misunderstood topic. So we're going to spend some time on it. I may break the rules a little bit. We'll maybe try and do 15 minutes for the overall sections. I have basic concepts and then advanced concepts, and then we'll try and reserve the last 10 minutes for dedicated Q&A as it comes up. So with that said, let's start with basic before we go to advanced. So I alluded to this earlier in the session. There's a concept that if you haven't heard of it, you likely will at some point in time, called the concept or the principle of least privilege. Sometimes this is referred to as minimal or minimum privilege. But it's really the basis that every user, process, or program must really only access the information that's required for that user, process, or program to perform its job. And the way that I typically think about this when we're having conversations with organizations that are implementing Marketing Cloud is, if the data needs to be in Marketing Cloud, it should really be fulfilling at least one of three main purposes. So segmentation, personalization, or data modeling. So for example, if I need that data in Marketing Cloud to segment on someone, maybe I want to use their zip code, 80202, downtown Denver. I need that data in Marketing Cloud to be able to segment on it and perform, let's say, a SQL query or a filtered data extension with that data. If I want to use personalization, so if I want to send an email and I want it to say, "Dear Jordan," when it lands in his inbox, I need his first name coming somewhere, which means that I need that data in Marketing Cloud as well. Or data modeling. There's probably not a use case where I'm going to segment or personalize based off of something like a case ID or a contact ID, that 18-digit unique identifier of someone. But this is important for us to bring in because that's how we would actually associate different data extensions with each other. So that's my litmus test of, should data be in Marketing Cloud? Is it going to be used for segmentation, personalization, or data modeling for any of the identified use cases that a business is trying to accomplish? And if the answer is no, I usually say, why do we need it? And sometimes there's another reason outside of these three for why we would want it. But this is the good starting point for principle of least privilege as it relates to security. Only bringing in the data we need to achieve the outcomes that we want to. I'm going to hop over into a concept of security settings. So within the Marketing Cloud admin setup menu, you would go in, I think it's under company settings, where you have a drop down that says security settings. This isn't a full list of all of the security settings that are out there. These are a subset that I've kind of pre-selected that I think have security considerations associated with them. And I'll just talk through these relatively quickly. So session timeouts, how often a user is kicked or logged out of the application if they're idle. There's various selections for this. I think the shortest is 20 minutes. If you're hardcore on security, you would say that the leading practice is the minimum time, so 20 minutes. That said, if you're more practical in terms of you are a user of Marketing Cloud, you probably don't want to be kicked out every 20 minutes because you don't want to log back in. So there's some trade-offs associated with shorter times versus longer times. Usually it meets somewhere in the middle. This one, I don't think there's any qualms about saying yes for requiring HTTPS connections. This is actually related to overall SSL certificates as well. So there's a concept of having HTTP versus HTTPS for both connections and then where we're hosting specific content within Marketing Cloud. In 2021, HTTPS is almost always a guaranteed yes, is what we want to be striving for. Restrict logins by IP address. This is dependent on, if the users that are going to log into Marketing Cloud, if they're all centrally located, if they're, behind a VPN that uses one IP, that can be easy to maintain. If you have 50 different users in Marketing Cloud that are each connecting from their home address, and maybe they're traveling for work, or they work remotely and that location moves, enabling this may cause issues for people being able to access Marketing Cloud and perform their duties on a day-to-day basis. Time of browser can be inactive, various. So this is usually like a 90-day period before, when I log in, I'll get an email that says, please input these specific characters to re-verify that you are the person that owns this account. I would say same degree as session timeouts. Your compliance and security team probably wants shorter. From a usability standpoint, making the user experience better, you'll probably land somewhere in the middle of the options that are there. Password complexity, more complex passwords preferred. The default is, I think, one special character, one alphanumeric, and one uppercase, if I remember, but there are other options in there as well. Usually meeting in the middle in terms of like password complexity versus also not having something so complex that you forget what your password is, which I often find myself in the scenario of. So keep that in mind. Password history, I'd say yes, at least 2. It's just best practice to make sure that people aren't using the same exact password over and over. And usually by 2, people have changed their passwords enough so that you're not getting necessarily repeat passwords. User passwords expire, similar to re-verification. I'd say probably about 90 days is right, but work with your compliance, legal, and security teams to identify what works the best. And then I don't know why this is an option, honestly. I would always recommend having the audit trail data collection enabled as yes. This is going to allow for you to see when some changes are made in Marketing Cloud from a configuration standpoint. I don't know of any trade-offs where no actually makes more sense to have that configured instead of yes, or enabled rather. So that's a very high-level overview of the settings for security settings. Obviously, these will be conversations that you would have with your organization or with whatever organization you're working with that's implementing Marketing Cloud security. Roles and permissions. The most important thing to know about roles and permissions, which if you're familiar with Core CRM, you can have a lot of different permission sets, and you take the superset of those permission sets. If you have access on any of those permission sets, you have access across everything. Your user has basically a yes, if it has yes on any. The difference in Marketing Cloud is that if I have multiple roles that are associated with my user, it's actually the opposite. So if any deny permission is assigned to a role and that role is assigned to a user, that deny permission will override any other permissions that individual has. So for example, if I've got both the Marketing Cloud administrator and Marketing Cloud viewer roles assigned to my Jordan Seal user, I'm actually not going to be able to assign Marketing Cloud roles because this role here specifically says that this person can't. Anybody in this role can't do it. So that will override the fact that the Marketing Cloud administrator role says that they can. So it's an inverse of the model from a security standpoint that we see within Core CRM and a lot of other products in the Salesforce suite. So small little wrinkle, not the biggest in the world, but definitely one to keep in mind. I've run into instances where I've had people just assign me all the roles. They're like, yeah, we'll just assign Jordan all the roles. And it's like, that will actually make it worse because you won't be able to do anything associated with the Marketing Cloud administrator, especially if you have custom roles, which is, this next slide is just an overview of the standard roles that come with Marketing Cloud. But if you have a need for custom roles, that can be enabled and created, in which case you can specify different permissions in a more custom manner. But these are the ones that come out of the box with Marketing Cloud. These interplay with each other in different ways in much the same way that was outlined on this slide. So, all right, that was the basic concepts. We covered that in 7 minutes. We're going to try and do the same for advanced concepts. And these are some of the ones that might actually appear in more detail or trickier questions for the developer exam and just working with Marketing Cloud in particular. So the first one, we're going to be talking a lot about encryption, by the way. The next 3 topics are about encryption. Transparent data encryption, which I always hear or self-refer to as TDE. And the way that I like to think about this is this really protects against physical attacks. So at the database level, transparent data encryption is something that Salesforce basically does at their data centers. It's a specific type of server. It used to be that it required a dedicated database. We'll talk a little bit more about infrastructure if and when we get to it later in the section. If not, it'll be included in the presentation that we provide after the call. But it doesn't require a dedicated database anymore. It does protect against physical attacks. So if someone was going to go break into a data center, steal that server, transparent data encryption is the encryption scheme that will protect against that type of threat. And I have a cheat sheet on threats across each of these different encryption topics that we'll look at in the next couple of slides. No impact on product functionality, minimal performance overhead. Keys are stored in FIPS level 3 compliant HSMs. The one key here is that this is physical protection only. And that actually leads us into the next topic for field level encryption and tokenized sending, where we actually get platform or application level encryption. So you'll never see anything with transparent data encryption. It's actually, I've never thought about that before. It is transparent. It's kind of like seeing is not believing. If you have transparent data extensions at the server, just something to keep in mind in the back of your mind as a product. So the next topic is field level encryption. I've had a lot of meaningful conversations about field level encryption over the years. And effectively, if you've worked with Shield as a product on the core CRM side, this is the same thing as platform encryption, which means basically when data is being stored in Marketing Cloud, you are applying a cipher to it to some degree, right? So if I have, Jordan Seeley, or I have first name as an attribute in a data extension, and I encrypt that, Jordan Seeley is going to change from Jordan Seeley to X37T, et cetera. It might look like I, was named by Elon Musk effectively. That might be a bad joke, but we're going to stick with it anyways. So field level encryption masks that data at the application level. So if you have a user accessing Marketing Cloud that maybe shouldn't be, whether they have a user account or maybe they've, phished and they've gotten login credentials somehow, that'll protect against personally identifiable information or any type of sensitive data across the board. The import process, or the process, is that you'd have that encrypted data come in. Usually that comes into the SFTP. Via data import, you would set up your encryption scheme. So you have keys within Marketing Cloud. There's a admin menu called key management. And then that key is basically used after the data is stored in its encrypted state. That key is used to decrypt that data at the time of send. So if I did still want to personalize based off of first name in this context, Jordan Seeley will be decrypted from that encrypted value to Jordan Seeley at time of send using our encryption keys. So it's a high level overview of field level encryption. There are some things to consider or limitations associated with FLE. It used to be the case, I don't know if this is the case anymore, but I still believe it to be true, is it can only be implemented on new instances. So there's an order of operations from an implementation perspective for field level encryption. And ideally, you want to start with a blank canvas for field level encryption because of some of those order of operations. Perhaps the biggest limitations with field level encryption is that you can't segment, filter, or query on encrypted fields. So knowing that we decrypt at time of send, let's say you were going to encrypt on zip code, right? If I wanted to create a segment based off of a zip code, I can't actually query or filter based off of an encrypted value. So it's definitely a consideration to keep in mind when it comes to platform level field level encryption. Can't use list sends, you must use data extensions, can't report on encrypted fields, both for Discover reports and standard reports. Let's see, what are the most important ones here, knowing that we're fighting time, which is normally the battle. Only email and text data types can be encrypted. So birth date might be an example of an organization might come back and say, hey, we want birth date encrypted. You can only encrypt email and text data types. So it's just something to keep in mind for actually what you can encrypt using field level encryption. Email is the only channel supported, and there is a performance impact during encryption decryption process. I don't think that this is really sizable. That's not been my experience, but I have been told for larger volumes, performance impact does come into play. So. All right, we're going to move right along. Field level encryption key management. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. You'd set up your keys, you'd bring them in. You want to set those up and bring them into Marketing Cloud before you encrypt the data using them. Order of operations. There's a concept of key rotation that I won't get into, but basically you don't want to have the same key for about 5, 10, 15 years because over the course of time, you have a higher risk associated with that key being compromised in a number of different ways. So they should be rotated on a normal basis. Within Marketing Cloud, this may come up. This is a concept around like what key types are supported. Remember symmetric, asymmetric, and salt. And then when we talk about the different schemas that are supported in SFTP is PGP and GPG. And I know I'm going to fly through that, but for the sake of time, we're going to keep moving because we're heading into tokenized sending for the last stretch here. And the way that I think about tokenized sending is basically an IOU, right? So if I've got a piece of paper and I'm going to use any piece of paper that I have available, but if I write an IOU on here and I say, you know, IOU, and maybe I use my contact key of 1, 2, 3, right? So I know 1, 2, 3 corresponds to Jordan. We're only storing this IOU in Marketing Cloud. We're not storing all the fact of, you know, where Jordan lives, you know, his birth date, his zip code, et cetera. But we're going to take that IOU and then wherever that data is stored, we're going to exchange it. And so at the time that a send is made, that's when we actually take our IOU, we go to the database where it's stored, and then we bring that information along for the ride as well. So that's the concept of tokenized sending. Similar to FLE, only implemented on new instances. It does not support segmentation, filtering, or querying on tokenized fields. So obviously, if those fields aren't stored in Marketing Cloud at all, we're treating them as an IOU. We don't get to segment, filter, or query on those either. Doesn't support mobile push, group connect, mobile connect. Most important ones here. Does incur some performance overhead. I've heard that this is more so than the field level encryption performance overhead, just because basically we're talking about two systems collaborating and coordinating with each other. And some of that will incur a performance trade-off for the additional security that you're going to get. So it does require a subscriber key value for each of those contacts. We need to know which person we're talking about when we give an IOU to get data about them. So with that said, here's my little cheat sheet on understanding threats and security options. So TDE is that use case of hard drive is stolen. Both field level encryption and tokenized sending, that they're at the application level, which, you know, unauthorized user sees data, they access data, or they exports data. This is where you're going to have that mask, or you're not even going to have the data at all, right? So field level encryption, that's going to be a whole bunch of randomized numbers or letters. Alphanumeric and tokenized sending, it's going to be a blank value altogether because we're not going to have that data persisted within Marketing Cloud. All right, we're almost there. I'm gonna skip through this pretty quickly, and then we'll give additional time for question and answer. Given we're about 10 minutes left in the session. Infrastructure services. This is the latest that I have. There's probably some additional documentation out there that has slightly more updated information, but different modules in Marketing Cloud are hosted in different places. And the reason why I bring this up is this is probably not something that will come up on the exam, but this is likely something that you'll run into in your professional life, depending on if your organization cares where data centers or specific services are hosted. An example of this that's actually not on the screen is something like Datarama. If Datarama is hosted in, let's say, Europe, as opposed to in the US, you might have different regulations that you have to apply for, or not apply for, but plan for, compared to if that data center location is not in Europe. So Advertising Studio, Exact Target, and Predictive Intelligence across the board, US. There's also a couple of instances of Predictive Intelligence that are in Ireland and Australia. The Social Studio instance hosted by Salesforce is in Canada. The one hosted by AWS is in the United States. Just something to call out. If your organization or organizations that you're working with have any type of considerations for where data centers and services are hosted, this is a good cheat sheet to have as well. This is specific to Marketing Cloud or Exact Target. So I won't get into the topics of pods and things like that, but effectively this is where some of those different pods and stacks are located. So if you log into Marketing Cloud and you see, you know, S7 is the one that I always see the most because I have access to like 3 or 4 different environments where S7 is the tenant. That's just saying, hey, this specific data center is located in Atlanta. So this is another good resource if you care about this kind of thing. It's related to the infrastructure that supports Marketing Cloud as a product. And then last slide before we get to open questions is just talking about how we approach multi-tenancy from a database standpoint. So there are some dedicated databases where maybe an entire database is for one organization versus one database is actually split across multiple. I don't know the ins and outs on this. I think that a lot of it will come down to load balancing and like the overall size of either contacts or storage associated with databases and different organizations that are using Marketing Cloud. But know that depending on your database, you might be sharing it. You might have it all to yourself. And if you care about having it all to yourself, that's probably a conversation to have with your Salesforce AE or with your customer success manager. All right, we flew through that. I think that's it. Oh, we have security check or security concepts knowledge check. I think this is the last one. Yes, additional questions. All right, so really quick for this one. If I want to encrypt data within Marketing Cloud, but maybe we're implementing MFA, multi-factor authentication, and or SSO, I might be comfortable with the fact that we probably don't need to do it at the application level because I have a reasonable suspicion that MFA and or SSO is going to be strong enough, security to say that anybody that's in Marketing Cloud should have access to it. But maybe I want to protect against physical attacks. So we know that in this case, that's transparent data extension. If it was application level, it would either be tokenized sending or field level encryption. We didn't have a chance, and I purposefully, I pulled this and put this into a different appendix slide. Installed packages in and of itself, I think will be something that a lot of the additional panelists will go into. But I'll just mention that best practices for managing scope assignments, same thing as least privilege. If you only need an installed package for an API integration to perform a certain task, only give it the scope to do that. So it's the same thing as permissions. Don't give it, system admin privilege if you only need it to upload data into a data extension. Right tool for the right tool, or right tool for the right job, excuse me. And then storing client ID, client secret, and access tokens. These are things that are created when you create an installed package. Secure those, store those securely, rather. I wouldn't reference those publicly. And depending on where those are being stored in code, there are beneficial ways or secure ways to store them, and there are not beneficial and non-secure ways to store them. So just do it securely. I'm sure that some of the other panelists will get into that at a tactical level. Importing data in an encrypted CSV file, what type of automation studio activity is used to decrypt the file and when? The answer to this one is really, it's talking about PGP versus GPG encryption in the SFTP, but what you need to know is that you're going to use a file transfer activity within Automation Studio, and that's going to be done in the safe house. So the safe house is a dedicated environment within the SFTP where you're encrypting and decrypting data. How long is the OAuth access token valid when using Marketing Cloud APIs? This is related to the installed package concept that I was just referring to up here. Know that the access token is valid for 20 minutes. So usually you will just refresh your access token whenever you make a new call, but the limit associated with those access tokens is 20 minutes by default. And then key types for managing encryption keys in Marketing Cloud. Last one, we're almost there, is SALT, asymmetric, and symmetric for anything that's in field level encryption. And then the schemas for our safe house are PGP and GPG, which if you can't, those will get mixed up all the time because they're just inverses of each other, but PGP and GPG. And with that, we made it. We got about 5 minutes left for any additional questions that have come up, and we'll see what we can get through, and then we can follow up with any additional ones. I'm also happy to stay on for some additional time if it would be helpful to answer any other questions that might have come up too. So.
Great job. Be careful what you wish for with that last statement, but great job. Just want to say thank you so much from all of us for just all of this wonderful speech in teaching everyone in regards to security. The next thing I want to do is let's go ahead and start asking a few questions, and I will get started. So just a quick reminder to everyone, if we do not answer your questions today, we also have Friday, which will be our big, we have a few panelists who will be answering questions in regards to just ask anything you need to ask. That's, we also have that coming up, not Friday, I don't know why I keep saying Friday, but the last week of this month, we have many people.
Yeah, it's on 27th, last day.
I appreciate that, Jasmine. So on the 27th, we do have a chance for you to be able to ask questions if you haven't submitted today. So with that being said, let's jump right in. So one question that we do have is, can we avail FLE after the account has been set up?
Yeah. So when I went through this process a couple of years ago, the instruction is that you want to have FLE enabled before you do really any additional configuration in the account. That may have changed over the last 3 years now, but if I was going to err on the safe side, you probably want to have either TDE or FLE enabled and some of the setup steps configured before you do material implementation in Marketing Cloud. But I think that the most up-to-date information will come from the AEs and the customer success managers as well. But my experience has been you want to do that before you actually implement. So if you're coming into an environment for Marketing Cloud that's already got extensive configuration, implementation, customization, and it hasn't done FLE or it hasn't had FLE enabled, it might be considerable rework to actually enable it moving forward. It might require a new environment. That was certainly the case 3 years ago.
Great answer. Thank you so much. So our next question is, MFA is the next step in security, but is there a way to retain the IP restriction even after MFA?
I don't know offhand. I think the answer is yes. And the basis for that is there's compatibility between MFA and IP restrictions within Core CRM. So I would imagine that the same will be true in Marketing Cloud. It's usually the case. I think I pointed out a couple of areas where that's not the case earlier in the session, but I think that will be true when MFA actually becomes required. I don't think that you're going to see IP restrictions or IP allow listing and whitelisting change materially with the introduction of MFA. But safe harbor, right? We covered safe harbor on this call.
Yes, we did. Thank you. All right, so let's go into our next question. IP restrictions are org-wide in MC. Is there a way that I can skip for one user so that for any emergencies, he or she can log in? Use case is the network team that updated the new ranges, and all the users got kicked out due to old listings. Was that confusing? Sorry, if I can reread it if I want to.
No. I was reading along too because I actually did find that one. I don't think so. I don't think that you could do it on a user by user basis, but I actually think that there's a setting where you can choose to inherit or not inherit IP allow listing between business units. So generally speaking, it is true to say that they're org-wide in Marketing Cloud, but I do think that if you're moving between business units and business units, you can actually say, I want them inherit, like the IP allow list inherited from the business unit as a parent versus not. And what you might be able to do is if you have users in that child business unit where maybe you're not inheriting an IP allow list from the parent, if they only need to be in that child business unit, you might be able to go that route. But I don't think it's possible to make user by user exceptions in terms of IP access.
I agree with you. I've never heard of anything where it was actually possible to do user by user either. All right, so I'm going to ask 2 more questions as it is now 10:31 and we do want to be respectful of everyone's evening. So my last 2 questions are, what is salt encryption key?
I read that one. Honestly, I won't be able to speak meaningfully to it. I'll find a help article and some additional documentation on it. I looked at it and I was more familiar with it a couple of years ago, but my mind isn't the steel trap that it used to be. So we'll follow up on that one.
All right, sounds good. So that will be something that we'll follow up with you guys on in our chat, in our Slack channel. And then lastly, what are some best practices, as per best practices, what will be the ideal duration for changing a token value?
Yeah, I think this is the access token for OAuth 2.0 for an installed package. The best practice is really anytime you make a new call to refresh that. So the timeout period that a token is valid for is that 20-minute timeout period that we were discussing earlier. But what I've always seen as best practice is anytime you're making a new call, just reestablish and refresh that access token. And then you can use that for the duration of however long you're going to be making those calls. So anytime you make a call is usually what I hear.
Perfect answer. All right, everyone, thank you guys so much for being a part of tonight's session. And again, to you, Jordan, for leading, and Jasna, JB and Gilda, thank you both so much for tonight's session. Do not forget that we will be posting this video, but we want to give it, we will be posting after we have finished all the sessions. So not tonight, it will be coming. And when we do post them, we will post them to the Slack as well as to the YouTube channel. Thank you guys. We're so happy you guys came. JB, do you have anything that you want to contribute before we go?
Yes, Naja, I would like to call out the link to the presentations. They will all be uploaded to the drive. I have shared the link to the drive in the chat window. We will also share all this recording and the links and all the resources in the Slack channel as well. And also, please be sure to register to all the sessions in the bootcamp. We have 4 more sessions coming up. Make sure to register to all those. And we hope to see you again next Thursday, same time. Thank you for joining.
Don't forget, please sign up for each individual one. If you don't sign up for them, you will miss the session. So sign up, sign up, sign up, sign up. We cannot wait to see you guys next time.
Thanks, everyone.
And every session after this one is going to be even better. No pressure for the other panelists. I know in particular, the session with Elliot is going to be great. So I will be joining that as a participant. I always get something new. Definitely sign up. You can learn something on any of these calls. And thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Great job, Jordan. Good night, everyone.
Bye.